A reading from the Acts of the Apostles. While Paul and Silas were in Philippi, the crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given Paul and Silas a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was an earthquake, so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately, all the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew a sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." Paul and Silas spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At the same hour of the night, he took them and washed their wounds. Then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up into the house and set food before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The response is, "Your right hand has saved me, O Lord."
Your right hand has saved me, O Lord.
I give you thanks, O Lord, with my whole heart. Before the gods I will sing your praise. I bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your steadfast love and faithfulness.
Your right hand has saved me, O Lord.
For you have exalted your name and your word above everything. On the day I called, you answered me. You increased my strength of soul.
Your right hand has saved me, O Lord.
Your right hand delivers me. The Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands.
Your right hand has saved me, O Lord.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father, he said to the disciples, "Now I am going to him who sent me. Yet none of you asks me, 'Where are you going?' But because I have said these things to you, sorrow has filled your hearts. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And when he comes, he will prove the world wrong about sin and righteousness and judgment. About sin, because they do not believe in me. About righteousness, because I am going to the Father, and you will see me no longer. About judgment, because the ruler of this world has been condemned." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When we turn from the deep mystical theology of the Gospel of John back into the more everyday world of the Acts of the Apostles, and today in our first reading, we hear the story of Paul and Silas on their mission of proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ to the world, being attacked, beaten, and jailed. And we find them in jail at midnight, praying and singing hymns to God. And everyone was listening to them. And then suddenly we're told there was an earthquake, that the foundations of the prison were shaken. It was so violent, and immediately all the doors opened. And then the jailer awoke and saw that this had happened, and he was about to kill himself, presumably because he felt that he would be dealt with harshly for having failed in his duty, or perhaps because of shame of having failed to do his duty, which culturally in those times was something that was more conceivable than it is perhaps in our day. But for one reason or another, that was his plan, and Paul told him not to do that because all of the prisoners were still present. So he comes in and talks to Paul, and the first thing he says is, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they answered, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." What must I do to be saved? This is a question that we as baptized Christians, and for the most part baptized Christians baptized in infancy or at least in childhood, perhaps could do well to ask ourselves more often. What must I do to be saved? Of course, in a very important and fundamental sense, we have been saved by the paschal mystery of Jesus Christ, in which we have been given a share through our baptism, strengthened through the sacraments as we walk our journey through this life. So in that sense, yes, we have been saved. But as we well know, we have also been given the gift of freedom, and we can turn away from God. And perhaps it's easiest for us to turn away from God in small steps, day by day, to forget about God's presence in our lives, whatever those small steps might be, disobedience, what have you. It's easier for us to turn away from God than we might at first think. So we would do well to ask ourselves that same question: what must I do to be saved? And the answer we already know. We wouldn't need Paul to tell us. Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved. Again, something that seems very simple, very straightforward. Believe in the Lord Jesus. Except for you and I, when we hear that word these days, we often tend to think of it as an intellectual exercise. We consider the evidence, we assess the evidence, we choose to believe or not to believe. And we know that we have already chosen to believe in Jesus. And indeed, we have already so chosen. But as Jesus has been saying to us throughout the Gospel of John, which we've been hearing these last few weeks in the weekday masses, or in the weekday readings rather, and in our Sunday celebrations, he says that those who love me keep my commandments. We follow Jesus' teaching. We listen to him, we learn from him, and we shape our life by that teaching. That is the journey and the job and the task of a lifetime. It's not a job that's completed in one day. It's not a job that's completed in one intellectual exercise. So this commandment of Paul to believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved is utterly and completely true. In a certain sense, it is exactly as you or I might understand it, and yet it opens before us the door to the Christian life as a whole. So we need to ask ourselves that question as well. What must we do to be saved? Do we open our heart to the Lord Jesus and to his teaching when we hear it proclaimed, when we open our Bible and read what he has to tell us about our life, about the way that we relate to one another? Are we open to that teaching? Are we allowing it to shape our lives in the path that we take? And indeed, do we have this, can we respond with the same joy to the great gift of grace that has been given to us in baptism and through the sacraments by God's grace in our lives as the jailer and his entire family? At the conclusion of our little reading from today, he took Paul and Silas, washed their wounds, and then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought Paul and Silas into the house and set food before him, and he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. Do we have such a clear and present understanding of the profundity of answering yes to that question? Do you believe in the Lord Jesus? By God's grace, we do and we will. And we ask him for that grace to continue in our lives, to allow us to open our hearts to him, to allow him to shape our lives so that we might answer that question truly each and every day of our lives.